Has every past president for the last 20 years known about this corruption with USAID and just chose not to do anything about it?
Well, most of them are on the take. Joe Biden was the head of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, which directly oversees USAID. USAID was funding Burisma. USAID gave money to Burisma and had a formal partnership agreement with Burisma. Barack Obama's mother worked for USAID. And the Bush family runs right through it. Bush's, Vice President Dick Cheney, Liz Cheney worked for USAID. They're all in on it. And this is the reason that the Trump revolution was so revolutionary, is because it defeated both sides of the USAID snake. And now we're going to see just exactly how the snake bites back when it's cornered.
It is wild, by the way. That's Mike Benz. I had him on relatively recently, and we touched on the USAID. I'm going to bring this out for a second. We touched on the USAID, and he was explaining how it's asset development and how it's been, it's called corruption to anybody with an emoticum. Is that the word? Of decency and intellectual honesty. To them, to those who don't want to call it corruption, it's just good business, good politics. We're going to get back to this because it's obviously the biggest story of the day, the biggest story of the week, exposing the deep state corruption that affects that from which the Uni Party has been benefiting. And it's revolutionary, earth-shattering. The only problem is everything that's happened for the last 3 weeks has been equally revolutionary and earth-shattering. The only problem is that given how fast the news cycle is moving, it's like, okay, we had the January 6th pardons. Now we move on to confirmation hearings, and we're going to get to Fetterman today. And then that comes and goes, and now we have the USAID, a scandal of epic proportions. And then we've forgotten about the Jan 6ers and the fact that there's still a half dozen of them, maybe a few more, who are still locked up in various gulags, DC, California, Kentucky, who haven't been given their freedom despite the pardon. And the problem is we moved on from that story, and people either were unaware of that fact or have just moved on now, not out of selfishness or whatever. There's no shade here. It's just the nature of the news cycle. And I'm not yet ready to forget, and not yet ready to not shine that big, shiny spotlight on it. I've developed a number of good friendships with a number of the Jan 6ers, Adam Johnson lectern guy, Jake Lang, met some very interesting people. And there's good people still stuck behind bars for no good reason. And we're going to cover that today with someone who's named Suzanne Monk, who's covering this, advocating very vocally. And she knows more than I do. And this is the beauty, is I don't know the most about everything. In fact, I probably don't know the most about anything, but I've got a good network where I can find the people who know the most about the things, such as Mike Benz and the deep state corruption, such as Suzanne Monk and the Jan 6ers, who are still in prison despite the pardon. And we're going to put that on capital B blast and bring it to the attention of Pam Bondi to make sure that Trump's pardon gets its deserved, intended, and lawfully required respect. And then we're going to talk about Roger Ver in a bit, because there's been some developments. I've got Encryptus back in our locals community, who AI summarized and translated the Spanish judgment, denying his appeal of the extradition. We'll get to that afterwards. But for now, Suzanne, I'm bringing you in. Ma'am, how goes the battle?
Good. Well, it's still a battle. We're still at war with the deep state, with the weaponized DOJ. There are still January 6ers who are being literally held hostage at this point by a collusion between U.S. Marshals and corrupt states, U.S. attorneys that are refusing to make that connection, that necessary authorization to release six January 6ers right now that we're really concerned about. Daniel Ball, Dominic Fox, Jeremy Brown, Benjamin Martin, Taylor Toronto, and Edward Kelly. These individuals deserve to have their charges dropped, dismissed. They need to be released. And we still have weaponization. It's a different battlefield, but the weaponization has not stopped.
Let me ask you, your audio is crackling just a little bit. Are you using an external mic?
I'm not. I could.
Yeah, maybe that might help just a little bit. You're using your phone?
Yeah, I am.
Okay, see if you can get. Do you have an external mic within proximity? And while
1 minute, Roxanne.
Yeah, go for it.
1 minute.
While you do that, I want to see what book that is in the back. Okay, now I'm going to see. Now I get to. Okay, hold on. How to Pardon the Jan 6ers. Okay, so there's a book in the back that's called The Presidential Pardon Power and How to Pardon the Jan 6ers. And there's a hat that says Make America Great Again. There's for those of you who don't know, I don't know the stories of all of them. The ones that I know because I've been getting messaged all week. One person in particular, Dominique Box, who is still in a Kentucky federal prison, despite the fact that he got the pardon and he's being held on state charges for DUI. We talked about Jeremy Brown when Brian Lupa CanCon was on a couple of weeks ago. And now we're going to get the details on the others from Suzanne, who has been very much following them. And we're going to
Does that help? Is that an improvement?
It's not, but it doesn't. It doesn't. We're gonna live with it.
No, hold on. Probably because it's not going into the. Yeah, hold on here. There we go. Let me see if I can plug that in a little better. See if that's improved. That may be a little better.
Yeah, not really. It's a weird.
The headphones to do that. So hold on.
This pisses. I'm just going to read a couple of the chats. This pisses me off so much. I can't really listen, but I can mute it and let it play. And I think you mean the substance of the discussion, not the audio crackling, which we're going to live with. It's not the end of the world. It's going to be substance over form.
There we go. There we go. I had to get my old setup out there. I had to get my old setup out. So here, that should be a little bit better, Mike, and earbuds. So I think I've got you a little better now. Can you hear me better?
No, I don't think so. I think it might be better the other way. Go back to the other way, and we're gonna leave it as is.
All right. How's that?
Yeah, we're gonna live with it. Suzanne, so tell us who you are. I mean, we talked for about 5 seconds before we went live, but who are you?
Suzanne Monk, founder of the J6 Pardon Project. We produced this book. Started this project in January of 2024. I have several friends. I've been an activist for the January 6ers since January 5th, actually 2021, when I first advocated for my patriot brother Enrique, who was picked up on January 5th for trumped up charges to prevent him from being there January 6th. They felt he was somehow in charge of the whole thing, as we saw in that trial. I've been fighting for these January 6ers since then. In January, we started the J6 Pardon Project to do 3 things. 1, produce a strategy guide for Donald J. Trump. We did put this out up through all the chains. The transition team did have a copy of it, I'm proud to say. Actually, a copy of this book is going to be in the Smithsonian. So I'm kind of proud of that too. But we got a lot of these copies to the folks inside. You can order this on Amazon, and it's called Insider's Edition, and it's orange. And many of the January 6th defendants who are sitting inside read this, and it gave them an education and an awareness of what the pardon process would be like and what we were doing out here to advocate. So we did 2 other things. 1, build a database, a January 6 defendants database of all the January 6 defendants and all the charges, convictions, sentences, prison locations, etc., veteran status. But we also advocated that public support for the president to do these pardons. And that was very effective. It was one of the most effective citizen activism movements we've seen in this country, because there was a great deal of resistance, as you know, to pardon all of the January 6ers. And that's what we saw President Trump do on January 20th. He pardoned all the January 6ers. We've read that pardon language. His intent was to have every single January 6th. But unfortunately, that is sorry, that was Benjamin Martin's girlfriend calling me, his wife calling me. So I'm just glad it wasn't from prison. I'd have to make a decision. Those are prison calls usually take priority. It's hard. So luckily she's on this side of the bars, but Benjamin Martin isn't. So, you know, this is a situation. We've still got individuals that are being held by that collusion of those deep state individuals, you know, really out of petty vengeance, I believe, to hold these few January 6ers. And there's 2 kinds of lawfare going on. So there's this holding them for January 6 related charges, things that they found in their search, such as Benjamin Martin. Benjamin Martin's case, he actually was charged with weapons that were in his girlfriend's house, in his girlfriend's safe. They were his girlfriend's guns. He did not have the code to the safe. So the FBI used the jaws of life. They pried it open with the jaws of life to charge this man wrongly with these weapons. And so in his case, although in many cases other individuals have been freed even though they had similar J6 search-related charges, the U.S. attorney in Benjamin's case is not making that authorization. So we have some people just defying the president, and frankly, they're defying it even in the U.S. Marshals. There is some level of intent in keeping these individuals like Jeremy Brown in Atlanta, not in Florida where his case is at, in Atlanta. And in the case of Dominic Box and Daniel Ball, it's so utterly absurd. Dominic Box needs to go to the county, right? That's where he can bond out on that DUI charge that you correctly were talking about. Daniel Ball is being held on federal charges, but he is actually in the county jail. But Dominic Box is in the federal jail, and he is not being released by the U.S. Marshals, remanded into county custody when he could bond out. And there's several other individuals that have other pending charges. Dominic's are just the most, non-offensive. There are several others that have other pending charges that they need to go back to the state so that they can address, and they are being held hostage by the U.S. Marshals in this diesel therapy cycle of Kentucky, Oklahoma, Atlanta, and other U.S. Marshal contracted facilities that they are keeping these men in, and it's wrong on either case. In either case, these men need to be released by the U.S. Marshals. They need to be released from these prisons, and if they have other charges, taken to the state where those charges are so they can address them.
Let me explain the diesel therapy. Everyone who watched my interview with Enrique Tarrio earlier this week knows what it is, but basically they drive you from prison to prison, put you in shackles, drive you around in this bus to keep you destabilized. And it's a form of torture, nothing less, because there's no practical purpose for it. Bringing it back to the different classes of people who are still currently detained. I had on Chance Upmore. He's a guy who's free, but has a lingering felony conviction or guilty plea because they found firearms and drugs while they were raiding him for the misdemeanor Jan 6 charge. So even though that has been pardoned, the incidental, call it fruits of a poisonous tree, are still standing. But he's free. Sure. You got Jeremy Brown, who pleaded or was... Did Jeremy plead or get convicted on the firearms charge? I think he pleaded, right?
I believe, and then an appeal. He's in the process of an appeal there. So there's even further legal action that they're defying. He should be out.
Well, that's so. In Jeremy Brown's case, the issue is that he pleaded or was convicted on also an incidental gun charge. I think it's like having explosive, because it was the grenades, which was incidental to Jan 6. So that didn't get covered by the pardon, though it probably should have. Then you got Dominic Box, who's being held in federal detention, despite the only outstanding charge now being the state DUI in Florida. If we can go one by one, and I'll just clarify if people have difficulty hearing the names, but so you got Jeremy Brown, you got Dominic Box, you've got, I get mistaken between Box and Ball. There's a guy whose last name is Ball in this, right?
Daniel Ball. Yeah.
Daniel Ball. What's his story?
Daniel Ball was actually here in the DC detention center. And if you read the news media, they will say that he was rearrested on a gun transporting charge. But we were here outside of the DC jail, and I'm sure many people are aware, for all 4 or 5 days outside waiting. Daniel Ball was never released from the DC detention center. He was moved from one side of the detention center and then brought back into his cell. And so if he was charged with a crime, it was, of course, for that .22 long rifle that he was charged with, and that assorted ammunition from that J6 search, which were his brothers. In many of these cases, these weapons were not even legitimately these individuals. So the FBI has reached to make these charges even viable. But in many cases, there are individuals, they are trying to use these additional search-related charges to continue to go after individuals. And there are several individuals who are at risk of future incarceration, future prosecution from charges like this, if we do not root out all the way to the core these J6 charges. President Trump's pardon was broad. I think it could be clarified. I would encourage the president, perhaps through executive order, to clarify his intent, because there are those who want to parse words and make it difficult to actually implement his intent, which I think is very clear, to free all the January 6ers and to make January 6th as if it hasn't happened as much as possible. I believe that's what the president wanted, and it's not being honored.
May I ask what you did before this? I mean, I know you mentioned stand-up comedy before, but do you have any paralegal training, or did you learn all of this from, from
You
point zero?
research, a lot of research sitting in trial. I spent every day of the Proud Boys trial. That was 4 months. I sat. That's a pretty good law education. Watching this miscarriage of justice. Watching the system of justice fall apart right in front of you. You certainly learn a lot, but also a great deal of research. I chair a PAC called Patriot Action PAC. We've been active in engaging citizens to engage their government and to use that citizen voice that is so important. But since and I started Reopen America PAC back at day 2 of the mandates and the lockdown. So I've been an activist for many years since President Trump has been in office. Live here in Washington D.C. And I try to fight the good fight, but I've been working to fight a smaller fight. But this fight is actually, unfortunately, very, very deep state. It is the absolute deepest of state that is still embedded in our DOJ, that is tyrannically defying the president and acting as if they are the shadow president, that the president's pardon cannot be activated because these individuals say no. And so we need to figure out who these people who are in the way of the president's power. We need to remove them. And frankly, we need to have these individuals released immediately. And it is my hope that Pam Bondi uses her authority as Attorney General. She could she could send that communication to these facilities that says, as U.S. Attorney General, I, as the superior of the state U.S. Attorney, authorize these releases. And that could happen, and we hope it happens very quickly.
Have you ever been in touch with Pam Bondi directly or indirectly?
Well, as indirectly as possible. One of the things with activism is you work what we call the back channels. I think everybody in politics knows what that means. You certainly work every connection that you have to an individual. And I'm not above, talking to a nephew or two if I have to. But certainly, Pam Bondi is a very busy woman, and we understand. I've not got a chance. She hasn't called me back yet. But certainly, we have communicated, and I think the public is communicating. We've done a lot of calls to the Attorney General's office this week. The comment line is certainly full of messages from very passionate Americans like myself who understand that these hostages need to be released, and we've been requesting that. We've also sent many, many comments to the White House comment line. I think we've kind of closed down the comment line a few days in a row with just active engagement by citizens to let our voices be heard and let folks know that we're concerned. Additionally, we've made calls to action to the facilities themselves to make sure that these individuals are being treated fairly and to put any leverage we can to encourage these facilities to move the process forward as quickly as possible. We want everyone to understand that America is not taking hostages on American soil. We're not going to stand down while American citizens are being held hostage in our own prison.
It was the video that you had sent me the video of you confronting a police officer outside. I forget what facility it was. Right, I get mixed up because I get a lot of messages. That was from you.
No, I don't think that was for me, but there is a lot of. I think that was from Allie. Allie has had a chance. Allie Rose down in Florida. Okay. Yeah, we have a lot of great activists who are on the ground, and they're actually working to set up a vigil down there in Florida in front of Tallahassee, where Dominic Bucks is at, just like we've had up here for so many days in DC. DC only has one January 6th at this point, although we do not know where Benjamin Martin is going to land. He was put on a plane, what we call Con Air, at 3 a.m. this morning out of his facility there in Central Valley, and he is being moved yet again to another facility within the U.S. Marshal system. So we're going to need top-down power.
I mean, I make a joke that, the constant transportation is psychological torture, physical abuse. What is the steel man? What is their explanation for why they're doing it? I mean, the sinister explanations, they want to lose him. They want something to happen in transit. They want him to react. They want to torture him. Right. What the hell is the idea of bouncing him around facility to facility?
They have no explanation. There's no explanation. There's no outward communication by the U.S. Marshals on why they are detaining these individuals. There's a lot of pressure in, we've made a lot of phone calls, we've sent a lot of emails, but there is no communication by the U.S. Marshals as to why this is happening. And in fact, the U.S. Attorney in Florida who could be changing the situation with Jeremy Brown, has turned off not only doesn't take phone calls, they turned off the fax machine. They're not even taking faxes. So it's a belligerent resistance that, frankly, at this point is becoming criminal. And in Jeremy Brown's case, a habeas corpus has been filed because it is criminal that they are continuing to hold a pardoned individual. And there's several others that they have the exact same problem. They're holding individuals that should be free men right now.
Are you, and I don't want to put you on the spot, are you able to list all of those who are currently detained, arguably or less arguably? We got Jeremy Brown, Dominic Box.
Yeah, certainly. Certainly. I've memorized them all and where they're at.
Okay, so
Jeremy Brown is in
go for it, because I want
Jeremy Brown.
You go.
We both are those fast talkers who talk at the same time.
Well, and
I know I'm talking to a smart person because we both talk at the same time.
Well, and there's a bit of it.
The secret.
The chat saying the crackling audio is internet issues, not connectivity issues. So I think there's a bit of a delay. So by the time you're reaching it, you start answering. Okay, I'm going to shut my mouth. List the names, where they are, what they were charged with, and mostly that. That's it. Let's go.
Yeah, Jeremy Brown is in FCI Atlanta. He is charged with federal charges out of the state of Florida, so he should be in Florida, but he is still in FCI Atlanta. And habeas corpus has been filed in his case because he is being continued held, even though his case should, in fact, apply to the pardon, right? Daniel Ball is a similar case. He is being held in Marion County Jail, Florida, even though he is in U.S. Marshals federal custody. So it's even the jail. We had a chaplain go in there, and she spoke with the jail chaplain, and they said it's very strange that a federal inmate is being held here in a county jail, but yet that's what's happening. And he is being held on those federal charges related to his January 6th search. So they just added that charge from the superseding indictment. They had the possession charges. Now they added the transport charge, and that's what they've charged him on, allegedly after his pardon was released, although he was never released from DC jail and remained in custody the entire time. There is Dominic Box, as we talked about. Dominic Box is being held in Tallahassee, Florida, even though he needs to be remanded to Duval County so he can deal with the DUI there, which he could bond out of if he could be put in county. Unfortunately, we can get neither the Duval County sheriffs nor the U.S. Marshals to figure out how to sort of close that tiny little gap in Florida to get Dominic where he needs to be so that he can address that state charge. There is Benjamin Martin, who was being held at a pay-for-profit facility run by a group called the GEO Group, the Central Valley Modified Community Correctional Institute, which is a U.S. Marshals facility. It is contracted almost predominantly by the U.S. Marshals, and it is pretty correct. It certainly looks a lot like you might expect what cops look like in a RoboCop movie. You know, it has that kind of corporate logo. He's no longer being held there. He's on a plane somewhere, but he has been held there for similar J6 search-related charges with this gun that was not his, not in a safe he could even access. And certainly in his case, it's very interesting. He's the only person who was in jail right now because he wasn't in jail when the pardon was implemented. He was required to surrender on January 22nd, 2 days after he had actually been pardoned, because the U.S. attorney in that case determined that because he was not currently in jail, he was not to be released and thus had to surrender. And that's why Benjamin Martin sits in custody right now. And of course, then we have the situation with Taylor Toronto. He is here in D.C. And the D.C. U.S. attorney has actually decided to continue 6 of his January 6th charges. They are on the same indictment. However, the U.S. government, in fact, under this president right now, and it needs to be corrected, is continuing a J6 indictment of 6 of those charges, and those are the weapons charges found in his vehicle, which was his where he was living at the time, and they were related. That was his J6 arrest. Those weapons were found just like everyone else when in a J6 related search. So, and then we have Edward Kelly. And it's one of the most unfortunate situations. Edward Kelly was actually entrapped by the FBI twice. He sits in Blount County, Tennessee, on a second federal conviction for a plot to harm the FBI. And what was a January 6th defendant was used as a confidential human source by the FBI agents who were investigating, and by the prosecutors that were prosecuting his January 6th case. They used a January 6th defendant as a confidential human source with an offer to reduce that person's sentence if they entrapped Edward Kelly in this plot to harm the FBI. They used the same tactics, accusations and hyperbole, taking things out of context, and they convicted him on this second weaponized charge. The same people who weaponized against him in his J6 case weaponized against him in this second charge, and he is still awaiting sentencing. He faces life in prison. So that case needs to be dismissed by the U.S. attorney, and each of these things can be done at the attorney general's level or at the president's level. And we understand it's a busy day up there at both of those offices, but if we could have 10, 15, 20 minutes of your time, we could get these January 6ers, these 6 January 6ers free and home with their families where they need to be.
So I'm going to share your Twitter feed, or I shared it already. I'm going to do it again. How do you're doing this? Excuse me, pro bono? I mean, like, what do you? It's not to be crass, but like people need to make a living.
No, I make this little guy. You see my President Nutcracker. This is actually one of the ways that I make my spare living. I'm a crafter, just like our friend the Electron guy. I do a little crafting on the side. So there's that, but I don't make any money doing any activism. And there's no money to be made in the January 6th mission. That's one of the things that's been very strong about the J6 community. How we've succeeded so far is being a very strong community. How we keep track of where these inmates are is our J6 location working group. How we've kept these folks in touch with one another is the Patriot Mail Project. How we've funded and supported these families are organizations like American Patriot Relief and the American Gulag Chronicles and Stop Hate and Condemned USA. These are groups, of course, Jake Lang's organization, which has done, all of that work as well. It is a community of January 6ers that has come together. And so, we're still in the fight. Unfortunately, a lot of these folks, the people outside of that community don't entirely understand what we're still facing. And it is, of course, these ongoing individuals who remain in custody, but it's also each and every individual who may have been investigated for January 6th. There are files inside the FBI of people who don't even know they're under investigation, but they may be on that Quad S list. They may be on other watch lists because of those FBI investigations for January 6th. And anyone who was there and frankly, or had proximity to any of the groups that were there may have one of those files. And we saw the situation with Matthew Huddle, who was shot by an Indiana police officer just last week. And our concern is, did some kind of list, did some kind of warning that officer received when he looked up that plate have an impact in the outcome, unfortunately, that was the loss of Matthew's life? We certainly need to be very careful going forward that we root out all of the effects of January 6th. The administration is going to need to pay, some close attention. I know we want to move on. I want to be enjoying the U.S. aid. I'm so happy. Riley Gaines, I'm so excited that men are going to get out of women's sports. These are all things I want to be celebrating. I have a bottle of champagne waiting in my cooler for the day I can start to celebrate, but I can't, because we are now at 17 days hostage situation for at least these 6 men and several others that need to be sent to the states where they can address their previous legal charges. Look, every January 6er was different. They come from all walks of life, and some had trouble in those walks of life, and they need to go home. They need to go to those states and to those courts and work that out. But they don't need to be held hostage by the U.S. Marshals, and certainly pardoned individuals who should be free do not need to be held hostage, and they need to be freed immediately.
I'm going to go into my locals community here, our locals community, and see if there's any questions that I didn't ask yet. So I shared the link, the last tweet you tweeted out 4 hours ago. Shared your Twitter handle, which is Trumpertarian, at Trumpertarian. You got the names of 1, 2, 3, the 6 men who are still detained for various different reasons, legally speaking, at least. And you're still on it. They are the 6 of them represented by counsel? Because and so what? I mean,
there's a lot of counsel. There's different situations, and I think every January 6er has a different legal situation, but there's a few categories. I would say there are belligerent lawyers. There are lawyers where they're public defender and they have a very liberal background with and there have been lawyers that have literally acted against the best interest of their January 6th defendant. There are some public defenders that I think are good to public defenders. And I appreciate Taylor Toronto's lawyer, Carmen Hernandez. She is fighting the good fight. You can see that in the motions that she continues to file to push for the justice for her client. But there are also, lawyers that are doing good work, but they are running into that brick wall, that same brick wall that all of us are running into. And then, then there's lawyers who I think they're ambiguous. It's not their biggest priority. They may feel it's okay for, a few more days in jail. They don't have that activism aggression that we do, and their families do, that they can get released immediately. So, that's the situation. And for those lawyers who are fighting hard, we appreciate that. And, we saw Carol Stewart and Jeremy Brown's case file this habeas corpus. I think that's an aggressive legal move, and I commend her on that. We need more of that. But here's the thing. The reality is, with regard to January 6th, for those of us who have been fighting this fight and watching this fight in the courts, watching the lawfare, I've testified twice in 2 January 6 cases myself, not as many as David Summerall. He's testified in 10. But, in seeing that battle, what we've known is that the lawfare, the lawyers have not been the solution in the past. And what we need is presidential power. That's why we pushed for the pardons. We knew that the only real solution, the only real cure to this utterly broken Department of Justice was going to be a constitutional solution. And right now we're in a constitutional crisis. The president's pardon order is being defied by individuals down the chain who have no authority to defy it.
It's amazing. And I'm comparing the chat on CommuTube versus the chat on Rumble. And obviously the chat on Rumble is much more reasonable and also much more appreciative. First of all, I don't think people know of these 6 gentlemen. And I know there's different legal bases, and I'll flesh it out in a little more detail afterwards. I'm certain a lot of people didn't know that you've been doing this for years. And there's a lot of people who owe their actual physical freedom to you and the people who are fighting for this. Because I'll tell you, very honestly, and I told Jake, he came over for a barbecue. It's like when he called me and said, I'm going to make what's the word? Establish a movement to pardon the violent Jan 6ers, so-called violent. And I had been on that boat beforehand, but I never thought it was going to happen. And now the problem is the news cycle moves so quickly. I think people they think that pardon issue has been resolved and it was a big W, but there's 6 people who are still sitting, rotting away in federal penitentiaries and being tortured. Okay, Suzanne.
The president said all, we said all, everyone said all. We're very clear on that. January 6th needs to be removed as a legal problem in this country, and that needs to be for every single January 6er who was charged, and frankly, every single unknown January 6er who was investigated. We all need exoneration. We all need January 6th, which was a witch hunt, a political weapon against the American people, an attack by the Department of Justice against the American people. That needs to be erased. And frankly, the people who committed that attack need to be disbarred. They need to be debenched, and some of them need to be arrested.
All right, amazing. Suzanne, we are now formally connected, and we shall keep in touch, and I'll do what I can on my end. A big mouth, which is good for some things, and so we'll be in touch. And if there's anything I can do, you'll let me know. And if there's news, you'll let me know, and we'll come back on and do a follow up next week.
Of course. Well, of course. And let me just say, thank you for, giving me any credit whatsoever. We worked hard, but I was doing what God told me to do, right? God sent a message and said, we have to fight for these people. And the community shares that view that we are doing, God's work. And so, the credit really belongs to our Lord and Savior, who is pushing each of us to have that compassion, that appropriate compassion for these individuals who need our help.
Amazing. Suzanne, we'll be in touch. Have a good one. All right, that's the first part. We're going to move over. We're going to migrate over to the free speech platform. Not because the chat is particularly feddy on YouTube today. I'm not asking. I do appreciate that some people think the orange hair was a shout out to Trump, and I'm not sure, dude. First of all, what are we, 6? Yeah. Once upon a time, I had. Oh, I gotta find that picture. Anybody watching in Rumble, can you pull up, not Rumble, in Locals, find the picture of my M&M day? I need to find that picture. I know it's in Locals somewhere. Suzanne is doing quite literally the Lord's work. And there's people who owe their freedom, or at least whose freedom has been reprocured as a result of all of the hard work that Suzanne is doing. Now, I did say I want to get to a few questions before migrate on over to Rumble, or you can come on over to vivabarneslaw.locals.com, because it won't be supporters only today because we're using StreamYard. Bada bing, bada boom. There were a couple of questions here. Straws. Okay, well, I'm not. Okay. Oh, so Stephen Britton over in local says, I don't understand the legal basis upon which they're being held. So, Stephen, this is my understanding now, and some are, I don't want to say legally justified, but are at least legally ambiguous, and others are not. Dominic Box, I'm sufficiently confident that I have a sufficient understanding to say it's unjustified, because the only charge pursuant to which he's being held is a state charge for DUI when he got pulled over for being passed out in his car by a Florida state trooper. Jeremy Brown, if you want to steelman it, you'll say his conviction was not related to January 6th. So the pardon, in as broad as it was, doesn't, like, hypothetically, not the case. Hypothetically, they go and raid Jeremy Brown's house for the misdemeanor, whatever he did allegedly on January 6th, or any other Jan 6er, and they find kidnapped children, in the basement. Well, you're not getting a pardon for that, because the argument will be they only discovered that crime because of their unlawful, unwarranted raid as a result of January 6th. I'm using a hyperbolic extreme example just to show you where someone might say, okay, that I can understand. In Jeremy Brown's case, they go raid his place for events resulting from or related to January 6th, and they find 2 grenades or 1 grenade. They find a grenade, and they charge him on that. And then there was a firearm, a sawed-off shotgun, which didn't meet state regulations, a separate constitutional question. Those are not directly related to the events of January 6th. They're just ancillary or incidental to the raid. There, you could say, okay, fine. Although I disagree, I can understand the legal basis. To be holding Dominic Box, I do not understand. And, the other one, the other charge, I think it was Nathaniel Toronto, or maybe I forget who else. But, the separate gun charge, okay, those are separate charges not related to the events of January 6th, but discovered as a result of the raids. That's the steelman, in as best as I can do it. I think it's fair. I hate it. It's stupid. And I think and so someone in Rumble said, there were no constitutional violations, so there's no fruits of a poisonous tree. I'm using that analogy, or that legal concept, mutatis mutandis, to say if there's a pardon for the Jan 6 charges, it should necessarily encompass, even in the hyperbolic case of someone trafficking humans in their basement, it should cover that as well, because but for the raid as a result of the misdemeanor charges for January 6th, they would not have discovered that. So you got to go through the lawful means of finding the criminals. Like Robert Barnes says, in as much as a criminal is scary, scarier still is a police system and a government that doesn't have to respect the constitutional rights to due process. By the way, is it process, the Canadian version, or process? I forget which one I get accused of doing, but I mix it up every now and again. Oh, the feds also planted shit. That's in Jeremy Brown's case, which I'm told, because there was DNA and what's the word I'm looking for? Textiles. There was material on the grenades because they were taped shut with the pin, as CanCon explained, and there was DNA and textile materials, fabrics that did not match anything of Jeremy Brown, not his dog, not his property. So that is the theory, that they planted that because when Jeremy Brown found out that they found live grenades at his place, he was mildly surprised. Okay, I hope I answered all those questions. I hope I can, ask, go retweet. Let me see here. C-Tune says, always better to have a system fully on warrant. Our problems often stem from warrantless actions. And then just see, and then Stephen Britton says ridiculous. The most ridiculous is the DUI, because you would never be, don't drink and drive, period. Although it's not clear if he was passed out in his vehicle, it's not clear if he was driving. Although law lesson 101, don't take it for anything more serious than this. If you are intoxicated in a vehicle, in the driver's seat, and it's susceptible of driving, they can get you on DUI. So like, there were some cases in Canada where, it's cold, somebody's at a party or drunk and wants to sleep it off in their car. If they're in the driver's seat and they have the keys to the car, you can get nabbed. The trick to doing it is not to have the keys to the vehicle if you're going to sleep in the vehicle, or be in the passenger seat if you're drunk and you have the keys. All right, that's it. Oh, you know what? It's not even a sponsored ad. It's not a sponsored video today, but I got my new package in the mail, and every now and again I get the waft. Oh, you can see the shiny grease from my nose there. I just get the waft of, delicious coffee. All right, get your butts on over to, if you're not going to come to vivabarneslaw.locals.com, CommieTube, come on over to Rumble, because we're ending it now. We're going to go vote with our feet, vote with our eyeballs, and bring the party over to Rumble. Viva Fry. And thanks, Suzanne Monk. That was fantastic. Okay, now I wanted to do one thing first. I wanted to show this Rumble rant, and we're going to get into, did I go too hard on Fetterman last night? Viva, my nephew is an attorney for several Jan 6ers. He's downtown Miami. You should interview him. Vilma Betancourt. I'm going to screen grab this and see if I can reach out to you. For sure. Who do I have coming on next week? I forget who I have coming on next week, but I got someone else coming on next week. It's gonna be fantastic. Sunday night. Oh, there is no Sunday night show this week because it's the Super Bowl, and some people like watching the Super Bowl. And I might have been invited to a Super Bowl party. We'll see. Okay, ending on CommuTube. Come on over to Rumble or come on over to VivaBarnesLaw.com.